All right. Hey guys, Felipe here. I want to talk to you today about something that's been on my heart for a little while. I've actually been having a lot of issues with making this video, so bear with me as I'm having to use my cell phone to read the story instead of my iPad and record and all that stuff. But nonetheless, first time teaching, and it's going to be a good one. It's a 5-part series on a very specific parable in the book of Luke. A lot of people know it, and it's one that's been on, like I said, my heart for a little while. God asked me to speak about it. He gave me a different viewpoint that He's given many others, and I'm going to get to that on part number 5. First part, I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to read you the full story, just so you know the story for those of you that haven't heard it before. And then I'm going to break it down about things that went on in those times, what it was like, and what it meant to do certain things in those times. Part 2, 3, and 4, I'm going to speak about the father and the 2 sons. Part 5 is a surprise I'm going to talk to you about because that's the one that God talked to me to teach. So, part 1 coming up. This is the parable of the lost son. So many people know it as the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son. It comes right after the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. Both really good parables, but the one I'm going to emphasize on today is the parable of the lost son, and I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Okay? When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come home, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all the years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him?" "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Okay, so that's the story. I wanted to read the full story for those who haven't read it. But now we're going to go back and we're going to talk a little bit about the story and the background behind it. Back then, a man was known by his wealth, his livestock, his land, the amount of servants, wives, his treasures, stuff like that. And his family was known by it, especially his firstborn. Back then, a man would give his wealth to his children, his firstborn child, usually, mainly, and sometimes his children after that, always the boys, unless they didn't have any. It was always given after death. So for the second son, not the first, to come up to the dad and say, "Hey dad, I want what's meant for me. I want my part of this to be given to me now. I don't want to wait." He was practically saying, "Dad, I want you to die. I want my piece of the land. I want my piece of the wealth. I want what's intended for me." It's not that he earned it. He just, teenage kid says, "Hey, I'm tired of living under your house. I want to go for my own. Give me what's mine. I want to, do my own thing." So he did that. The father actually said, "Okay." A lot of times people would get disowned, thrown out of the house, thrown out of the town. They would end up not getting anything. Very seldom did things like what the father did actually happen. He actually split up his wealth, gave it to his kids. And then it says, not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for a distant country. So he gathered all of the wealth that he could, all the money he could get from his piece or whatever the father gave him. And this is probably, my guess, is because once he did that, there was a little bitterment, there's a little fighting in the house. Like, why would you do that? Like, what are you trying to do? Maybe he was actually trying to live and do his own thing at the house, but then everybody kept like, "What are you doing with the money? You're spending it wrong, this and that." So he grabbed what he had. It says not long. Could have been days, could have been a couple months, but he probably got fed up and said, "You know what? I can do this on my own." Distant country. So he got out and he went somewhere where no one that knew him could judge him. Okay? And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. So he's just throwing away his money. and wild living. I don't know what wild living like that was back then, but I'm gonna guess they had parties and dancing and awesome eating, and like the other son said, he may have found his way around some women. I don't know. Um, but after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. So he spent all his money. He's alone. Nobody knows him. All the people that were there to party with him for him spending all the money, they were there for the money. They really didn't care about him. So he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. So this kid was a child of a wealthy person in a whole other country, but he, because of what I believe would have been his pride, maybe even, just embarrassment, he ain't going back. He's got to prove himself, right? He went and hired himself out to someone in that country. Now there was a famine, so they're just like in these days when there's a famine or a bad economy, it's really hard to find a job. He ended up finding someone who gave him a job feeding pigs. So he would sleep in the stable. He was pretty much a slave, a servant to this person, so he would have a place to stay and a place to eat. And it shows back then that when he did this, he got so hungry just watching the pigs eat the pods or the husks, the corn that he was having to give the pigs. He got so hungry, the pig's food looked good to him. The slop looked good to him. Now understand that back then, for a Jew to be around pigs, to eat pig, a pig was considered a very unhealthy, unholy animal. It's a no-go. So, for him to have done that, he must have been in a pretty big need, right? It's considered a sin. Then he came to his senses, and he realized that, it's probably good at Papa's house. It's a lot better at Papa's house, actually. And he decided to go back. This is the part where you guys need to understand. Going back after leaving a place like that, you're not wanted by the townsfolk. You're not really wanted because you went and trashed your family's name. You ran off on those that were there for you. So back then, people could get stoned, people could get killed, they would get run off out of town. Nobody wants you there. And the only reason he was able to stay was because the father saw him first from a long way off. Okay? So imagine walking back to your town or whatever, to your parents, to whatever, and saying, you know what, I was wrong. If the father didn't see him first, the townsfolk would have got rid of him. Daddy wouldn't have even known, probably. Or maybe they would have told him afterwards. If the brother who was angry caught him, probably the same thing. Okay, now let's go to a couple other parts of the story. Once he got back to the father and the father hugged him, he said, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. The best robe belongs to the one that owns the land, the one that's seen as the highest. Okay? That's a sign of royalty, that's a sign of dominance. He said, put a ring on him. What does that mean? Back then, a ring was a sign of authority, was a sign of a certain amount of wealth, and it had the family name. So anyone who wore that ring knew you for your family and who you were from, who your dad was. And that ring back then was looked a lot like worked a lot like a credit card works today, right? They had credit cards back then, but in the form of a ring. That's pretty cool. Like, bing. But that's the way it would work. Is they would press it into a wax. When they went to the market, the market man, whatever they were selling, would say, and at the end of the month or whenever it was time to come pay, he would just come and show it to Daddy, and Daddy would pay the bill. So that's how things would happen back then. The next thing was sandals. They stuck him on his feet. Only owners or family members of the owners would have sandals. Slaves, servants, hired men, they would all be barefoot. And that was just the way it was back then. But they put sandals on their feet. They recreated, they brought him back into full authority. Okay? To me, putting those sandals is like, hey, you came from somewhere that you weren't, whoever you weren't. Those clothes ain't you. Throw this on. Get out of those shoes, which he wasn't wearing any shoes, but it's like, step into these new shoes, because as the people say today, learn to walk in these shoes or whatever. That to me was like, hey, this is the new you. Start walking this path. Yeah, lost it. Sorry. But he also said kill the fattened calf and throw a party. Okay, you guys need to understand that the fattened calf, back then, out of all the livestock you had, out of all the animals you have, the fattened calf was the nicely treated animal, the one that was fed the nice food, the green grass, the one that was made sure stayed fat, and they did that to be able to kill them for very special events, moments, times. Someone of royalty came to visit, whether a king, queen, distant family member that was known to be up there. Very special events like a wedding, things like that. So for the dad to say, kill the fattened calf, we're celebrating the return of my son, that was a big moment. It's like, okay, I see what's going on here, It's party time. Like, he's back. Okay, and that's kind of the story behind the thing. So that's part one, guys. I'm sorry if it's a little boring, but we get to go into the next parts. You guys are gonna love the next parts. Part 2 coming up in the next video.